Welcome to the Work It Out podcast, where we answer everyday questions from a biblical perspective so that you can be strong and courageous in living out your faith. I'm Vaughn Sanders. I'm the lead teaching pastor at First Baptist Church in Bolingbrook, Illinois. I've had this idea for this podcast in the back of my mind for a really long time. What I hope to do is serve the Christian, whether they be a new Christian or someone who has been in the Christian faith for a long time, and help them know from a biblical perspective how to react to different situations and people that they encounter in just the day-to-day life. As we look at ourselves in 2020, we can tend to think that we're so far removed from the biblical standards in the time that the Bible was written. But you'd be surprised when you look at the Bible and you see how much it pertains to us today. One of the wisdom writers wrote, "There is nothing new under the sun." And as you read through the pages, you quickly get to see a lot of the things that we're challenged with today. The biblical people that we learn about were challenged with those same things as well. Lately, I've been wondering about what type of content and what should I talk about and how can I talk about it? When should I launch this particular podcast? Unfortunately, the impetus for this launch is because of the unfortunate news that happened on May 25th, 2020. That is when George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Derek Chauvin was on the scene and murdered another man based on the suspicion of George using a counterfeit $20 bill at a convenience store. Unless you've been living under a rock, you're likely to be familiar with the various details and the ins and outs of what happened in that particular situation. So I'm not going to recount those here. I'm not sure that they even validated that the $20 bill was in fact counterfeit. And frankly, that's not even the problem. That's not the issue at hand. The point is, even if it was a counterfeit $20 bill, George Floyd did not deserve the death penalty. And even more than that, what he did deserve was his due process, to be tried in front of a jury and a judge in order to determine what that penalty would be. George didn't get that opportunity because of the decision that Derek and the three other police officers made on that day. The problem and the cause for the outrage and sadness and the protests are because, unfortunately, George Floyd isn't the first to have his life taken away by someone who was sworn to protect and to serve. If you think back to July of 2014, Eric Gardner used the same words that George Floyd used for his last. "I can't breathe." This is while Eric Gardner was pinned to the ground, much like George Floyd, by the New York City police officers. We can name people like Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Eric Reason, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Alton Sterling. The list goes on and on where police failed to preserve life. Of course, police officers have a very hard job. They have to make split-second decisions when it comes to life or death situations to protect not only themselves, but innocent bystanders and others that might be around. But there are too many cases where Black Americans are brutalized and killed by law enforcement officers. And these law enforcement officers, they rarely face the consequences for their actions. Again, unfortunately, we have a lot of other data points where non-Black mass murderers, for example, have been able to see their date in court, and where blacks who were suspects of far lesser crimes weren't able to have their day. On August 3rd, 2019, Patrick Cruces killed 22 people when he opened fire in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. He had his date in court on September 12th, 2019, and was indicted on capital murder charges. Or, if you remember back to June 17th in 2015, with Dylan Roof, who committed mass shooting in a church in Charleston and killing 9 people. During his arrest, officers not only provided him with a bulletproof vest for his protection, but someone actually went and made a run to Burger King to get him something to eat. We long for justice to be served. Many understand that not all officers are bad, but we need the bad cops to be held accountable. They need to be fired and prosecuted and not coddled and put on administrative leave. So you might be here today and understand how we got here, understand all the details and nuances of what has taken place. Maybe you're here today with the question of, what can I do? How can I make things better? How can I ensure progress? For my Anglo friends, we appreciate your words of support, but now we need to see action behind those words. You don't necessarily have to go out and protest. I think the long-term change will only take place through relationships. Take a look at the people that you're surrounded with the most and diversify that group. Be around people and get to know people who aren't like you or even don't agree with you. Look at your social media accounts. Many of you will find that it is a virtual echo chamber where everything that you already think and believe is just being reverberated back to you. James 1:19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." If you would earnestly seek to do life with people who don't look like you, don't act like you, and people who come from a different background than you, and you get to know them earnestly, I think that's when we can start to see some change happen and take place. In Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, habit 5 is seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. As much as some of us would hate to admit it, we don't know everything. We don't have all the facts and the background necessary to get the whole picture in everything that we encounter in this life. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone where they're assuming your position? They pretend to listen, but they're selective here. And they completely end up missing your point because they're too busy waiting for you to stop talking so that they can rebut, so they can say what they have to say. Most people, even general conversations, listen with the intent of responding instead of understanding. Next, for my Anglo friends, I need you to speak out against racism. As you learn to become more empathetic to the plight of those who are different than you, then you'll start to see and acknowledge the microaggressions that take place and the blatant racism. And you must stand up to condemn it and condemn it swiftly. Ephesians 5:11 and 12 says, "Don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what is done by them in secret." Once people in your tribe realize that it is unacceptable in our society, they'll either change or they'll retreat to the hole that they came from. We should boldly speak against racism. Just as we boldly speak against abortion, abuse, drugs, and sexual immorality. For my black friends, we've got work to do too. Now, I know you're tired and exhausted of having this conversation and others like it. We've had these conversations for as long as many of us can remember. But I pray that we're at a tipping point where non-blacks are now seeing how egregious these societal ills are. So as best you can, have these conversations with those who want to listen and earnestly want to do better. Do so transparently and without assigning blame. Galatians 6:1 says, brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. Let them hear how your experience has affected you as a person, as a human being. Let them know how these things have affected your family. While we can acknowledge the reality of systemic racism in our land, it cannot be used as an excuse for you not to be great. There's a litany of historic examples where Black people have refused to be confined to the barriers of racism and Jim Crow. People like James McCune Smith, who was the first Black man in America to earn a medical degree, and this was in 1837. And he also went on to open the first Black-owned pharmacy. Maybe you've heard the name of Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first documented self-made female millionaire. Not just Black woman, but first woman who was a millionaire because of her company that surrounded cosmetics and hair care. There's so many more to name, so many familiar names that we have, like Alvin Ailey, Maya Angelou, Shirley Chisholm, Charles Drew, Jesse Owens. Each of these people pursued their goals and dreams despite their obstacles. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. The reality is, for the Christian, is that you don't ultimately work for the person that signs your paychecks. The one that you answer to, the one that you are working for, is God himself. So do whatever it is that you do, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do on your job, it is not insignificant. Whether you're making coffee at the coffee shop, you're flipping burgers, you're picking up trash, or you're architecting the next big building, you are doing it for the glory of God, and that should give you purpose. True greatness cannot be stifled or contained when you're in alignment with the purpose that God has given you. There's a lot more that can be said on this topic. Perhaps that we'll pick this up another day, but I just wanted to start the conversation. It's been cathartic for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. Something for you to get your gears going as we work through this particular situation. And that's what we're here to do, to help you answer everyday questions so that you can be strong and courageous in living out your faith. So thanks for joining me today. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Also be available on YouTube and Facebook. You can go to vaughnsanders.com to get updates about where you can find it. But until then, may God bless you, and we'll work it out together.